Thank you all for coming. So I've been involved with the Wolf Moose Research Project. I started as a group leader in 2021, but the story goes back farther than that. Let's see. Do you want to flip slides, or where's my slide slipper? Yeah. So as many of you know, I've guided dog sledding trips with Paul Shirky for over 25 years. And so first, I'm probably going to skip around a little bit. Some of this is my own story, and some of this is more about the project. So I'm going to first talk about how I got started. Actually, you can flip back. And what makes Isle Royale special and worthy of being the site of a research project. And what happens to how the ecosystem is, even though it's environment or climate-wise pretty similar to here, but the forest looks very different over there because of the presence of moose. And then I'm going to talk about when I was a group leader in 2021, working off of the 2019 data. And then we'll show some pictures from various pictures from the 2024 Moosewatch Expedition, and talk about why we collect the things that we do. And then I'm not sure if any of you are going to be interested in shouldering a 50-pound pack and slipping moose skulls around, but maybe you know someone who would be interested. So I'll talk at the end how you can get involved, or someone you know. Okay, so it all started with this guy right here. This is Paul Shirky, recent picture. So in about Paul and Rolf Peterson, the lead investigator for the Wolf Moose Research Project, sat on the board of the International Wolf Center back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then Paul learned about Rolf's project, and Paul would give these lunch talks during our dog sledding trips on the first day when we would have the participants come inside. And Paul would go and talk about something interesting. He talked about something different every time, and he never told the same story twice. But one of the things that he talked about was this Isle Royale Wolf Moose Research Project, where regular people could go and participate as citizen scientists in the research. And as a pretty new guide back then, I thought, wow, that sounds amazing. I want to do that someday. So it sat on the back burner for a long time for me. And then in 2009, when I built my timber frame in Grand Marais at the North House Folk School, I decided that since I was going to be taking trips over there to go fetch my timbers, that I should make this the year to go out to Isle Royale. And so I was a volunteer in 2009. And then I did nothing for a long time. But one of the guys who was in my group in 2009 would join the Wolf Center as a member, and he would come to Ely on his way out to Isle Royale. And he kept bugging me. He said, "You guide canoe trips." He said, "You should be a group leader." I said, "I don't want to be a group leader. I don't hike. I get my fill of hiking from portaging." And I'm like, no. But then he kept putting this bug in my ear. And so finally, in about 2020, after, you remember the pandemic, we were all kind of going stir crazy to get outdoors. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just send an email to Rolf and see if he would take me on as a group leader. And much to my surprise, he said yes. He said, "Come on out. How many trips do you want to do?" And so I signed up a crazy thing to do all three weeks. So I was on Isle Royale for a month in 2021. I did all 3 early spring Moosewatch trips. So I should back up a little bit. So the Moosewatch expeditions are descended from Earthwatch. So originally Moosewatch was part of the Earthwatch program, but the evaluations that came back said that the hiking, it was too hard. And so the Earthwatch program came to Rolf and Candy and said, "Hey, can you make these trips any easier?" And they said, "No." And so they branched out on their own. And so that's why Moosewatch is called Moosewatch, is because it was a derivative of an Earthwatch program. So they do 3 trips in the spring. As soon as the ferries start running in the middle of May, they do one mid-May, end of May, and one in beginning of June. And they like to do them in the beginning of summer before too much foliage starts growing on the bushes and on the ground, so that, because what the groups are doing is going out there and looking for bones on the ground, so it's easier to see the bones before anything starts growing. And so I have decided that I like group 2 because it's maybe a little bit warmer and it's still before the bugs. So, yeah, Paul Shirky has a big connection for why I am involved with Moosewatch today. Okay, so Isle Royale is special because, and it was chosen as the site of the research project because it is a self-contained ecosystem. So this is Isle Royale, the largest island in Lake Superior. Right there, Isle Royale. It's about 40 miles long and 10 miles wide. So it's large enough to be an ecosystem of its own, but small enough to be studyable, be able to be studied in research. So it's a self-contained ecosystem. It's also far enough from the mainland where the animals can't go back and forth in practice. In theory, they could go back and forth because some winters an ice bridge forms, but it's becoming more and more rare that an ice bridge forms and the animals can get off the island. And that was one of the factors that led into why the Park Service decided to reintroduce wolves in 2019. Okay, and then one of my jobs as a group leader is to keep my group out of the swamps. Because Isle Royale is pretty much a series of ridges and swamps, ridge, swamp, as you can see on this relief map. So group 1 and 2 go out of Grand Portage and we go to Wendigo on the west end of the island, deep here in Washington Harbor. And so we concentrate our moose bone searching on the west end of the island. Group 3 goes to Rock Harbor from Michigan, and so they search the east end of the island. So in addition to its size and location, Isle Royale has some features that are left over from the Ice Age. Like there's some rare plants and animals that are like insects that are on Isle Royale that aren't on the mainland. And there are also some animals that are on the mainland that are not on the island, such as deer, raccoons, and skunks. And so for the purposes of the research project, what that means is that it reduces the number of uncontrolled variables in this predator-prey relationship. And so the wolves and moose have approximately a 1-to-1 predator-prey relationship, whereas the moose is the primary prey for the wolves, and the wolf is the primary predator for the moose. So this is a graphic representation of when an ice bridge formed. So you can see it used to happen like every other year historically. And then it went to once every 4 years. And then there was a big gap where there weren't any ice bridges. And when the ice bridge formed, it was less and less time where the ice was viable for the animals being able to walk on. And so what ended up happening is that the researchers could see this coming in about the early, like 2012, I think is around the time when they first raised the alarm with the Park Service. Hey, maybe we should bring in some new wolves to get in some new blood into the DNA pool. And so the Park Service, there's a lot of red tape that goes, a lot of a lot of things, hoops that the Park Service has to jump through in order to do a reintroduction. And so they drag their feet. They're just like, well, we'll just let it's a wilderness. We'll just let nature take its course. And then what ended up happening is that there was an explosion of the moose population, and the moose started to starve. Like there was on the mainland, if the moose ran out of food to eat, they would disperse. But since they're contained on the island, they just started to starve. And so in 2021, my group was finding some moose just by smell, like just carcasses. And usually they were less than 100 yards away. So this is one of my groups. And this is the Wendigo Ranger Station where the ferry drops us off. And there are a lot of sheds on Isle Royale. And I think my data sheet later on we might get to see show that we're finding approximately 12 sheds a day. And so some of them they bring back, some of them they put on the signs, is just to show people what a moose antler looks like. Okay. One of the other fun things about the Isle Royale Research Project is it's not just about research. So I'm going to pass around some cards that they're watercolor paintings that Rolf Peterson himself made. So you can enjoy that part of the study as well. So maybe we'll start some in different spots. Okay, so around here, what do moose eat? Yeah, they usually eat willow. For some reason, there aren't willows on Isle Royale. And so on Isle Royale, moose eat balsam trees. And so if you can find a balsam tree that's taller than waist high, we GPS mark that and report it because that's amazing to find a balsam tree that's, we call them escaped balsams if they're getting taller than the moose can reach. And so like around here, it's pretty, I don't know if anyone's ever tried to go bushwhacking, but our Native American neighbors, what's the name of the band, our neighboring band? Bois Fort, and that is the French for thick woods. And so I don't know if anyone's tried to bushwhack around here, but it's nearly impossible. Or you have to be put some serious effort into it. But over on Isle Royale, since there are almost no balsam trees, you can walk through the woods. And so it makes it a lot more thinkable to go bushwhacking. Can you find slide 39? So the overbrows of balsam fir makes the island look a lot different than the forest does around here. And they even have 3 fenced-in areas on the island that they call moose exclosures. And so it's like 40 by 40, well, about the size of this room actually, where they just fenced it in. And so they were trying to demonstrate what the forest would look like in the absence of moose. And it looks like our backyard. So there are balsam trees and yew and other deciduous trees that the moose would be happy to eat. Okay, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the wolf reintroduction in 2019. So they brought wolves in because they could see that the moose were starving and they wanted to restore the balance, the predator-prey balance, with bringing the wolves back. And so when I was a group leader in 2021, Rolf was sending us, we had much more accurate data to work with, because a lot of what we were working with Moosewatch was the winter study data, where they would fly over and look for where moose had died during the winter. So that if they saw ravens fly up, they would GPS mark that and send us in later. But in 2021, we were working with what they called ping clusters. So when they reintroduced the wolves, they fitted each one with a GPS collar. And so it was sending out information on its location every like twice a day, let's say. And so they could see where the wolves were going around. And so if they were just like wandering around, it's like, okay, that's interesting, that's nice. But then the places where they wanted us to go to, they called ping clusters, where the GPS collar showed that the wolf would come back to a spot again and again and again. And so they sent us to these locations. They say, okay, go to this spot and tell us why the wolf was interested in this location. And so in about a third of the cases, we would walk there with our GPS, and there would be moose bones. So that's a pretty easy explanation why the wolf was interested in that spot. Okay. And in about another third of the instances, we would get there and we'd be on the top of a high ridge where we'd have a fabulous view out over Lake Superior. We're like, wow, this is a great spot. So we thought, well, maybe wolves have an appreciation of beauty. Then we thought, has to be another reason. And what we figured out was that it's a lot easier for the wolves to run downhill and catch a moose than it is for them to run uphill. And so they would sit and just watch for things to go by that they could run down and catch. And then this last third of the instances, approximately 1/3, we would go to a spot where there was a beaver dam or a beaver lodge, some beaver activity. I should say former beaver activity. So the study had always known that beavers made up a small portion of the wolves' diet. But what we didn't know was when they reintroduced the wolves, that they pretty much made a beeline for any place where there was beaver activity and cleaned up on the beavers, even though the moose were starving. The moose would have been easy prey. But so what they learned was that beavers are actually a preferred food for the moose, or for the wolves. Okay, I'm just going to flip through a couple of slides and talk about some and not talk about others. You can see my group going through a meadow here. And Megan down here in the corner has a skull attached to her pack. And so as we eat our food, you think when you go on a canoe trip, you eat your food pack gets lighter. Well, on Moosewatch, your pack gets heavier actually, because we're eating our food, but then we also pick up certain things that the study is interested in. So anytime we come to a kill site, if we want to find the skull and the metatarsus. So we end up with these packages of skulls and metatarsuses that we attach to our pack. So our packs get heavier. Yes, okay, the metatarsus is, it's the, if you can think of your arm as having 3 sections, so you have your upper arm, your humerus, tib, or ulnar radius, and then the metatarsus is one of the foot bones, but in the moose, it looks like part of its leg. Because moose are classified as ungulates, which the Latin word for that breaks down as fingernails. And so the moose hoofs they're walking on their fingernails, if you will. And so that metatarsus looks to us like it's part of the leg. And the metatarsus is special because, I hope it's okay if I'm not. How many people are on Zoom?
9.
Okay. The metatarsus grows in the moose's first year of life, and then it stops growing. And so they can measure the metatarsus and figure out what the condition of the browse was during the moose's first year of life. And so that's why we collect the metatarsuses, because they want to look carefully at those. And then the skulls are interesting. It helps them age, figure out how old the animal was at death. And they especially like to see the teeth, because the teeth lay down rings kind of like a tree does. It's the cementum on the tooth looks different when they're eating summer browse versus winter browse. And so they can slice the tooth open, polish it up, and then count the rings. They can figure out how old the moose was when it died. And so what they're doing with the data that we collect is called population reconstruction, where they figure out the years of life that the particular moose had on the island. And then they're also correlating it to what the condition of the browse. So they can tell you pretty accurately what the population of moose was 10 years ago, whereas their current estimates are pretty much just estimates. Okay, so this is our camp. That's my tent there on the right. And this is my group, a pretty fantastic group of individuals. So Ken had been on several trips already. Rolf tries to compose the group so there's a nice group of experienced people and new people. So Ken was maybe our bone expert. And then Davy Gibbs, fabulous guy. He had been a nuclear submarine builder for the Navy. And his boots, he was from Kentucky, and his boots fell apart on the first day. And by the end of day 2, he was wearing Ken's Crocs with a pair of neoprene socks. And he bushwhacked with a loaded pack 29 miles in Crocs. And so he earned the nickname Davy Crockinit. And Cindy and Megan they're both teachers. So we get a lot of teachers who come to Isle Royale who want to share the details of the study with their students. And Garrett is just a young man, and he loves to take pictures. So a lot of the pictures in this slideshow are his. Okay, so there you can see a graphic representation of the moose and wolf populations over the years. So when the moose population the wolf population goes down, the moose population skyrockets. And so you can see that red line that dropped off drastically in 1996. So that was a big die-off. And then the chart continues. At the edge of the chart, there was another big die-off. Okay, so this was the details of the reintroduction of the wolves in 2019. Some of them came from Grand Portage. The Grand Portage Band contributed them. And then there was an island in Lake Superior in Canada where they didn't want wolves anymore. And Isle Royale wanted the wolves. So they brought an entire pack intact from Michipicoten Island in Lake Superior over to Isle Royale, with cooperation from the Canadian government. And they wanted those animals because they were accustomed to taking down, I think it was elk. So they wanted wolves that were accustomed to taking down animals bigger than a deer. Let's see here. Okay, so one of the things that we are looking for when we're in the field is abnormalities, pathologies. So there you can see their vertebrae one that doesn't look quite right. So anytime we find something that's unusual, we also pack that out together with the skull and the metatarsus. I don't know if I'm going backward or forward. I guess I'm going backward. Is this the forward? Okay. There. So sometimes we get to do stream crossings, and it seems like most of the moose watchers have adopted the habit of taking as our second pair of shoes, we take a pair of Crocs, so that when we get to a stream crossing, we don't have to tiptoe around trying on slippery rocks or wet logs. And we just switch into our Crocs and walk across the stream and then put our boots back on. So that's what the understory looks like in May. You can see there's no balsam, and we can just walk through the woods as long as we stay out of the swamps. So this was a beaver dam that we decided to walk across. My group thought, oh, well, we could walk around, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, that would take us an hour. And so we decided to walk across the beaver dam. It was, they were all amazed that nobody got wet. So sometimes we get to see Lake Superior from the ridges. Oh, I'm going backwards. So this is a picture of a shed. So we measure the pedicel, so where the antler attaches to the skull. So we just measure that, take a GPS marking reading, and just leave it in place, because the animals do chew on those antlers for calcium. I don't know if you can see this very well. It's a skull, and so we don't call it an official kill until we find the skull. There's Davy Gibbs in his Crocs. And this is what, he's sitting right next to an antlered skull, which is kind of the holy grail for moose watchers. We always try to find, we find lots of sheds and lots of skulls, but we hardly ever find the antlers still attached to the skull, because they would have had to die in the fall, and a lot of moose die at the end of winter when they don't have their antlers on. This is one of our data cards. So we collect all kinds of data about like about the site, and basically we're trying to communicate in data our estimation of how old was the moose when it died and why did it die. So if we find the legs, like sometimes we find the legs like several hundred yards away, and so we can figure out that that was probably a moose that was killed by wolves. Whereas if we find all the bones that were kind of right in a row, it probably starved to death. And then we count up all the bones and report how many we found. So one of the special things about Moosewatch, I think, is you go from being a backpacker to being a archaeologist and researcher in just a moment. So it's a combination of skills. And sometimes the bones can be kind of hard to find. Birch bark looks a lot like a bone. And so when we were walking through the woods in formation, let's say 6 people walking about 10 yards apart, someone sees a bone, they yell, "Bone!" And they yell it louder than that. But everyone comes to that spot, and then we do a circle search to try to find the rest of the bones. This is in the Wendigo Visitor Center. So this is really fun to go visit at the end of a Moosewatch trip, because sometimes we don't remember exactly what all the little bones were. Sometimes we find the little knuckles or the little toe bones, or the calcaneus is a separate bone. And so we find these little bones, and then so it's fun to go look at this one that's all put together, and we say, oh, that's what that one was. And like the sternum is often in 6 parts, and it's very soft bone, and so it often degrades, and so it's nice to go see one that's intact. This is one of the drawings that we use in the field to remind ourselves of what all the leg bones are, especially. And there's Megan with her packet of metatarsus and skull. This is the spine. We count up all the vertebrae. They have cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. So a lot of times the group members end up specializing something. Like one will say, I'm going to be the leg specialist. And so they'll learn all the leg bones. And somebody will be the spine specialist and they'll learn what all the different vertebrae look like. So there's thoracic and lumbar vertebrae and the sacrum also. And there's Ken putting together a leg bone. It's fun to figure out how all the different pieces fit together and like how the cartilage rolls, how the like the knee bone, especially how that rolls. Yeah, I think he's holding a back leg there. Megan holding a piece of the spine, and Davey showing us the skull and antlers. We find all sorts of interesting things on bones. This is a fairly recent kill. This is a little graphic. I don't know if anybody might not want to look at this. This one is probably only a few months dead. So we even found the stomach contents, which is going to be in the next picture. There, that's the rumen. So we take lots of pictures and take lots of notes and turn all our data into the study. There's a vertebra. And an antlered skull is pretty heavy on the pack. Okay, this shows a little bit more about the teeth, about how the cementum gets laid down. And so we're especially looking for the incisors, there are 8 incisors in the lower jaw that we look for. And those are the ones that they like to cut a cross section and count the rings. They can do it with the other teeth as well, but the incisors are more accurate. So here we can see some pathology. This is a part of the pelvis. Actually, this is not pathology. Right there, this is one of the bone sockets that we look at the most, where the femur attaches into the pelvis. And we're looking, so this one's actually pretty normal. This is where the ligament comes in and then attaches in here. And when the moose starts to get arthritis, this socket will start to fill in. This one shows a little more pathology. See this one so this one you can see, actually this one's starting to fill in. These are both abnormal actually. This one's starting to fill in and then this one just has some abnormal growth in the socket. And then they take our data and they publish in peer-reviewed journals. There's a sacrum in there, pelvis, and some leg bones. This is our group's data sheet. You can see there's our number of sheds. So some days we didn't find very many, and some days we found a lot. We also keep track of how many miles we walked on trail, how many miles we bushwhacked off trail, how many snowshoe hares we see, how many gray jays, and how many live moose we see. And then sometimes we come across bone piles that other groups have found. So that's our data sheet that we turn into Rolf. This is a map that shows where all of the groups went so far that year. And this is the trip that my group did. So you can see we searched the island, but we really are only taking a sample. Okay. So I want to make sure we leave time for some questions. We got a bunch of questions. We'll just start.
I'll come around and bring the microphone around, so we'll start and go this way.
Is there any data on what happened with the moose population before the wolves showed up in 1949?
Oh, I'm not a good one to answer that one.
Is there any historical data, any way to figure out whether the moose were starving, when there weren't wolves then?
So Rolf thinks that historically there weren't moose on the island, that they arrived in around 2000 and around 1901, I think he thought was around the year.
So that would have been almost 50 years without wolves, though.
Right.
Okay, okay. Just the second thing is the difference in the wolf population and the moose population and how different that is from the Voyager Wolf Project study with regard to white-tailed deer. Because the deer and the wolves fluctuate up and down together. And the opposite is true with the moose on Isle Royale, apparently.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Isle Royale was chosen as the site of a study because it was supposed to mimic the conditions found on the mainland. But what they found is that it does not mimic the conditions found on the mainland because the animals on the mainland can disperse, whereas on Isle Royale, they're basically trapped on the island.
It's on.
Okay. For your question, I believe there was a fire on Isle Royale sometime in the 30s. And needless to say, there was no food for the moose and population crashed. And I think it's had one or two other crashes before the wolves actually got there. And then, with balsam fir being such a great part of their diet, is there any sign of spruce budworm reaching Isle Royale?
Oh, bunch of good questions. Yeah, so we have sometimes gone through the area that was burned in the fire from the 30s, and that area is primarily a mature birch forest now. And there generally aren't a lot of moose in that area. So the moose are not evenly distributed across the island. So there's some areas where there are more moose and some areas where they hardly go at all. And then I have not seen any sign of spruce budworm in the balsam fir because the fir that are there are pretty short, and most of the budworm, the way the budworm spreads, from my understanding, is in the moth stage where they can go from tree to tree up pretty high. And so they just aren't able to get a foothold, from what I can tell.
Question, without the ice bridge, how sustainable are either of these populations? What would happen if we didn't have human intervention and declining instances of ice bridges?
Well, that's a good question. Probably one that is yet to be answered. So the one fascinating thing about being involved with the study is they have questions that they haven't answered yet. That they think, like the Park Service was thinking, oh, well, maybe we should shut down the project. They've already learned everything they could possibly know. But we find out that there still are questions, still things that we're finding out about the predator-prey relationship. So that probably remains to be seen.
Thank you for coming out this afternoon. How does your research differ from the work that was done by David Meach over 50 years ago?
I'm going to have to say I'm not super familiar with David Meach's research, but I know that he was Rolf's predecessor. So he was the founder of the study, and then Rolf has been involved since he was a graduate student. And I think Rolf mainly has developed the research techniques that are used today.
I'm curious about how many groups you actually have on the island on a given summer. And then secondly, how long, I know it must vary, but how long does it take you to process when you do find a moose, to go through what you just showed us and the data sheets and everything? 1 day project, or how long does it take?
Ah, that's a good question. Okay, so how long the project, each Moosewatch group is there for approximately 8 days, and that's because of the ferry schedule. So we're on trail for a week, basically. And it kind of varies how long it takes us to process a kill site. Like if we have all the bones there, and like if we can find them all quickly, then it's us less time than others. But I'd say on average, if we're not feeling pressed for time, processing a kill site takes about an hour, maybe a little more. But sometimes if it's late in the evening and we're trying to get back to or late in the afternoon, we're trying to get back to our camp before too dark. Sometimes we just take a GPS reading and just cruise, or else we'll just grab the skull, the metatarsus, and fill out the kill card later. So sometimes we make it go pretty fast.
Or, about 6 years ago, I read a book by David Meese. There was a brand new book about his early research. Was that called Wolf Island?
I believe so.
Yeah, excellent book. I would recommend it. About all about the adventures he had studying wolves on foot and by airplane at the beginning of his research that he was doing with the for I think it was Michigan Tech.
Yes.
Yeah, with Ellen Durward. Just a fascinating book. And your lecture is one of the best we've heard in a long time. Your lecture today.
Oh, thank you. I can't help it. It's an interesting topic.
Did you, the fox, red fox, there's lots of those on the island, there used to be when I went out there years ago. Do you count those? Do they interact at all with the moose and the beaver and so forth?
Yeah, interesting question, because they're not part of our data summary. Although I did note that we came across a fox. And one time we were sitting in camp, actually my group was laughing at me because, well, I kind of have some habits left over from canoe tripping. And so I had brought a frying pan, and these AT hikers were just laughing at me. It was like, what? You have bacon? And actually, I think I won them over. But so we were sitting in camp one morning, I was frying bacon, and we were like, hey, there's a fox. Like, we could see this fox, it was doing a zigzag pattern coming toward us. And finally it got about 20 feet away, and one of them stood up and scared it away. It just went away. We were bush camping there, so it wasn't a campsite. But yeah, we do, and sometimes in the campgrounds we see fox. So they clean up on the carcass sites.
Are there other questions?
Well, I know I was gonna mention how to get involved. If you know somebody who would like to join us as a citizen scientist on a research expedition, you can look up Join a Moosewatch Expedition, and that'll take you right to the website where there's all the information.
Similar question to the fox question. You're noting how beaver has become, or you know that's become preferred prey for wolves. Have you ever tracked that population on Isle Royale? I know in other projects, the Voyager Wolf Project has tracked beaver population decline up and increase compared to the wolf population. I'd be curious to see how that compares on Isle.
Yeah, interesting. No, I don't. We don't collect any data on beaver population, pretty much because they just decimated the population. Like, we come across beaver, like places where beavers have chewed down aspen, but the beavers are no longer present. And like last year we went through this big meadow, and there was a beaver lodge where so the meadow had drained because the beaver dam had washed out. And so we could crawl inside of this beaver lodge. It was actually pretty interesting.
Any other questions?
One of the Zoom, Mike Metz here. I just wanted to comment that Rolf does keep track of beaver.
I've sailed to Isle Royale a couple times, and there were foxes that were pretty mischievous. That one of them came into the sailboat early in the morning and stole some stuff from the boat. And at the time, the rangers were warning when people are camping or in the shelters to take their leather boots inside, because the foxes would steal them and eat them. But I had a question about, I don't think, unless I missed it during the presentation, that Is there an estimation of how many deer, how many moose die every year? And is there anything tracked about, the wolves that die?
Yeah, so they do track that, and I don't know the actual numbers, but it fluctuates from year to year. So they think about 200 moose died off in 2021.
What's
and
numbers now approximately wolf and deer?
So they don't have an exact number. So the wolves that were reintroduced, some of them have been successful. And to your point about animals taking food, they had to institute a food storage policy on Isle Royale because some of the wolves had recognized that campsites were a good place to come and get food. And so they installed bear lockers similar to what they have in Voyageurs National Park and like Big Bend, other places in the national park system, the bear-proof bear lockers because of the wolves. And they last year was the first time that we had to hang our food also. Although when we're bush camping, I don't think any wolves would find us, but in the campsites, they have to store their food in boxes.
One of the issues that Dorg and Mish were trying to find out a little bit more about in the initial studies on the island, and as depicted in the Wolf Island book that I just talked about, was the size of packs and the fluctuating size of packs seasonally and for other reasons. And also in connection with that, what happened to wolves who left the pack either voluntarily or were chased out for behavioral problems or whatever. And he talks about seeing from an airplane a pack. I cannot remember the size of that winter group, but I think it was over 24. And there was one straggler following it around. Either the straggler had not decided whether to rejoin or could not, but it's just interesting behavioral issues.
Yeah, so many variations.
So lots of groups and individuals are on Isle Royale all summer. Are they instructed or asked to report any dead animals they come across? And if so, would that be of any use? Or would be too random to be useful for the data that you guys collect?
So a lot of times hikers, if they come across, it's pretty unusual for a moose to die right on a trail. But when they do, the hikers just naturally, they're not instructed to report it, but they usually do. Like, oh, we saw a dead moose. Or dead, they usually just naturally report those findings. But yeah, we're mostly looking for moose bones. And Rolf has even instructed us that if we find a fresh kill like that one, leave it in sight and let the, like one thing we do if we can find a fresh kill is we cut through a long bone of leg and examine the bone marrow. Because healthy bone marrow looks like pink butter, but if it's runny and red, you know the animal was starving. And that bone marrow will disappear, like the little, I don't know if they're worms or what, they the bone marrow disappears within a couple months. But otherwise, Rolf only wants us to collect cleaned off bones. And so they'll probably send a group into that site this year and collect the rest of the bones from that site. He says, no juicy bones.
Maybe this relates to juicy bones, but is you find much predation on calving during, I mean, you're in the summer season, so wolves must prey on young at times.
Yes, that's one thing it's a little hard emotionally to come across one of those sites or to be involved in that type of search. But yes, they do find that wolves will sometimes follow around a pregnant cow and she births two. The wolves take the first one, the second one survives. It's not pretty, but it's all part of the food chain.
I'm going to wrap us up because it's right about noon or right about 1 o'clock. But this was fascinating. I, for one, never knew that LynnAnne could just look at pictures of bones and tell you what they were. That is a fascinating skill I'll be sure to remember. Next week, we have Randolph Briley coming with Minnesota Tourism to tell us all about tourism in Minnesota and the Explore MN project. And then the week after that, we are having a farewell party to Stephen M. Schoen. So make sure you come back on the 28th because there will be cake, I have been told.
Yeah.
Yes.
There is food. It's
There
not
is
just me.
food. Yes.
There is food.
Yes, there is food and there will be fun and excitement and reminiscing about our longtime friends and neighbors.
And tell the history of Tuesday Group.
Yes, I'm personally looking forward to that as well. So thank you so much to LynnAnne and thank you to everyone who came.